All right, Richard Sheridan. Welcome to the Ryan Morrison Show. Richard Sheridan is the CEO, chief storyteller, and co-founder of Menlo Innovations in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Renowned for building joyful, human-centered workplace cultures and authoring Joy Inc. and Chief Joy Officer. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Great to be with you, Ryan.
Yeah, I'm grateful to have you here. It's been really exciting getting to meet you as of recently, and just hearing all about you and Menlo and the things that you've been able to build and the culture and in this startup ecosystem here. So I wanted to start really with the question about Menlo. You talk about Menlo being built to end human suffering. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So and talking about the ways to do that as building joy through the workplace. So what I want to ask about is, what is the Menlo Way and how has it shaped not only organizations locally, but also organizations worldwide?
Yeah, Menlo is focused on a brand promise of joy, as you mentioned. And for us, joy has a very particular meaning based on what we do for a living. So Menlo as a company designs and develops custom software for its business clients. And for us, joy has a very tangible meaning. It is purpose-driven. We believe every company should be able to ask and answer two fundamental questions. Who do you serve, and what would delight look like for them? For us, we serve the end users of the software we're designing and developing. Intriguingly, those are not the people who pay us for what we do. We're being paid by businesses to create software for them. But what we want more than anything is for the people who end up using the software in their everyday work lives or home lives to say, I love this software. That is joy for us. If we can produce that on a regular and consistent basis, we are bringing joy into Menlo by serving others. And that is our primary focus. And that is what a lot of companies are looking for these days is, how do we create an intentionally joyful culture? And so people do come to visit. They read the books I've written. They get on Zoom calls with me. They want to find out, how do we bring more joy into our world? And we have, throughout our 24-year history, always opened our doors to the world to invite people in and share with them what we've learned over the last 24 years.
That's great. So take us a step back, before Menlo and the background. Tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah. So I'm a pure Michigan kid, grew up north of Detroit in Macomb County, and had a very wonderful sort of right place, right time moment for me. I was in high school, freshman year, 1971, and the high school I was in, Macomb County Schools, was offering computer science for the first time ever. I had no idea what it was, but I signed up for the class, typed in a 2-line program into a teletype, because that's the way they used to work back in those days, and it clacked out "Hi, Rich," because that's what I told it to do, and I was hooked. I knew what I wanted to do the rest of my days. 54 years later, I'm still in the software business, so I think I chose well. But that launched a career, and that career had started carrying me into all the wonderful things that happen in the tech industry. But there was this other line that was starting to become very apparent to me, and it was a different line. My heart was starting to break for a profession that I thought would carry me for a lifetime. And I started falling into a trough of disillusionment about the software industry, because I wasn't seeing the results that I was hoping to see. We were missing deadlines. We were blowing budgets. We were delivering low-quality software with lots of problems. Users hated what we were creating. The marketing team that we were building for said we were building the wrong thing, even though we thought we were building what they'd asked us to do. And that started a journey in my head that said, if I'm going to stay in this profession and survive, I need to find a better way of doing things. And ultimately, that journey led to the Menlo Way, which is a very different way to design and build software, to organize software teams. I was drawn towards authors and books that were not about technology, but how do we organize the humans more effectively? And how do we get the most out of those people, not by putting their noses to the grindstone, as the old saying goes, but rather creating an environment in which creativity, innovation, imagination, and invention can thrive. And that's really what led to the creation of Menlo Innovations.
That's incredible. So, talk us a little bit more about those key insights, those key learnings that you were able to draw from to develop that philosophy of the Menlo Way, and where that joy, like, why did you center around joy and not something else like balance or something like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of people have asked me over the years, where did the joy come from for you? And I used to think it was the technological achievements, and I think that's still a big part of it for me. Software is kind of magical. If we magicians who know how to write software create something interesting, people are amazed at what we can do. And so I started tracking towards that. But when I really got honest with myself, I thought back a much further depth into my personal story of what does joy mean to me. And I had to go back to when I was 10, before I touched a computer. And my parents had bought a bookshelf like you would from IKEA today. And it was out in the garage in a box. They went out to dinner and a movie. I was on my own at home. I was on my own at home, and I decided I was going to build that shelving unit for them. So I went out in the garage and put together 50 pieces of wood, all the 200 nuts, bolts, and screws. And I was so proud of myself. This thing was about 8 feet wide, about 6 feet tall. And I was so excited that I'd done this for them. Then I realized, wait a minute. I built it in the garage and they want it in the living room. So I literally inched that thing out of the garage into the living room, right where my mom wanted it, set up her knickknacks, my dad's books. I wired up the stereo, and I had my mom's favorite album playing when they walked in the door, and she cried. And for me, that epitomizes joy. When the work of your heart, your hands, and your mind are done to the service of others, to their delight. That's where joy comes from for me. And when you're in the software profession, and I've said this the world over, because I get to give talks on joy all over the world, and the message is the same, and no one's ever disputed it. If you're in the tech field like I am, there is only one thing that we software people want, and that is to delight the people who use what we've created. We want to see our work get out into the world to actually be delivered. A lot of software teams don't get to see that. A lot of projects fail before they even get delivered. But once delivered, we want to feel like we had a chance to work with pride. We want to feel like we did a good job, because there is an element of elegance that is possible with software. And then we want people to love what we did. And if we get that, I will tell you, most programmers, if they could get that on a regular, consistent basis, might even consider working for free just to get that kind of joy, that kind of receipt of joy from the people they intend to serve. That's what we want, to create something meaningful and have it delight them. And I wasn't getting that for so much of my middle career. Wasn't getting that at all. In fact, I was getting just the opposite. People hated what my team created. The people who created it hated what we delivered. They were feeling like they didn't get a chance to work with pride. And I climbed a career ladder up to vice president of R&D for a company on the west side of Ann Arbor called Interface Systems. And over the 2 years between 1999 and 2001, I, working with a consultant then became my co-founder, James Goebel, got to design a new way of working, and it transformed that company in a way that literally got me back to joy. Now, I didn't use the word joy back in those days, but the feeling was there. I started to realize, and we built it into our mission statement on joy on almost the first day of Menlo, is that our goal was to return joy to what we believed was one of the most unique endeavors mankind has ever undertaken, the invention of software. Because software is just different. And so we got there. The way we organize the people is different. The way we organize the process is different. The way the people work is different. We had to invent some new things in order to make sure that we were going to delight the users. And so happy to talk about all those pieces and parts, but I'll stop talking right now.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to get into the psyche. I think you touched on a couple of different things. I think your story about your parents being out, right? You said to the movies, and then you decided to put together this bookshelf for your mom in the space that she wanted it, and delighted her with the music and all of that. It's such a transformative story in your life, and I feel like really launched this psyche and philosophy that you brought into things that you were striving for in your career and ultimately ended up creating, right, through Menlo. I think that's really powerful. And I've seen a lot of founders, they have those kind of core stories or core moments that really shaped who they are. And then, maybe it's that inspires the problem that they choose to solve, or maybe it inspires an opportunity that they decide to pursue, right? So that's a really fascinating story. For me, I want to dive into two things that you were touching on. One is the psyche and the processes, and like peeling the curtain back on how you've set up your company and the team environment. And then I also want to touch on next the elegance factor and perhaps different projects that you have worked on over the years that really became those delights to the users and to the customers. And maybe we could even expand it beyond that to other examples that you see that maybe a broader audience would recognize in the world. So let's dive into the team and the psyche first, though.
Yeah. So we open our doors to the world. So anybody can come and visit. We have half a dozen people in for a couple of days this week just to visit. Had a gentleman come in this morning to visit with me to see the team. Had a remote team come in and visit from India this morning. And they're all, I think, looking for one particular thing. What does it take to build an intentionally joyful culture? And when people come and visit Menlo and they walk in our front door, and I'm often there with them when they walk in, the first word is, wow, because they can literally feel the human energy of our team. I think as leaders, one of our jobs is to keep human energy high. I think it's one of the most squandered energy forces on the planet is the waste of human energy in our workplaces. We know this because the Gallup Group measures human organizations decade in and decade out and says 60 to 70% of people are literally disengaged at work. Well, that's a failure of leadership. So when they walk in, they can literally feel the palpable human energy of Menlo, because there's this construct in Menlo that surprises everyone. All of our programmers, and quite frankly, almost all of our team members, are working in pairs. 2 people, 1 computer, all day long. The pairs are assigned, and we switch them at least every 5 working days. Well, what that creates as a work product is conversation. Because if you and I are sharing a keyboard and a mouse and we're collaborating together all day long to solve a particular business problem for our clients in software, we have to talk about it. I have to probe in and hear what's on your mind. You want to hear what's on my mind. Ultimately, one set of hands is on the keyboard and mouse to type in the code, but the code was a result of our human collaboration, of our conversation, of our thought process that we're sharing with each other. So you can imagine if you have a whole room of people, we have a team of about 50, and they're all in conversation all day long, solving problems together. It's kind of a noisy environment. It's a big, wide open room. There are no cubes or offices or walls or doors except for our glass-walled conference rooms. And so that palpable human energy is there, and that's what creates the wow feeling. And we are, in fact, an in-person workplace, which these days is highly unusual. But we're in 5 days a week. Everybody gets 10 elective work from home days, but we're in the office 5 days a week. We prefer as a team to be in close collaboration with one another. Those pairs that I talked about are assigned, and we switch them at least every 5 working days, which means if you and I work together for 5 days and then we switch pairs, one or the other of us is probably bringing a new person up to speed on what you and I collaborated on. So now there's more conversation, trying to bring someone else up to speed. So that simple construct alone does so much to build relationships between our team members. It builds opportunities for learning and sharing because you know something I don't, and vice versa. And so everybody at Menlo is growing sort of an inch every day just from those simple interactions, because you're bringing something to the table and so am I, and we're sharing it with each other. One of our core values is helping others succeed. And that's a key point in our pairing construct is my job is to help you succeed at learning and solving a problem that we're trying to solve together. The other aspect of Menlo goes to the heart of the joy we're trying to produce in the world is a uniquely designed practice we call high-tech anthropology. And that is a trademark of Menlo. A lot of people want to know, why would you need anthropologists on a software team? And if you accept the simple premise that most software is ultimately going to be used by humans, wouldn't it be neat if we understood the humans we're going to serve the way an anthropologist would? by studying them in their native environment, learning their workflow, their habits, their goals as human beings, and take that learning, their vocabulary even, and build it into the user experience of the software we're designing and building. So our high-tech anthropologists are really our paid empaths to go out into the world and empathize with the people we're going to serve, and ultimately not think of them the way our industry typically does, as stupid users that we're going to write dummies books for someday, but rather honor what they know and recognize they have unique skills and talents, they have unique wisdom and knowledge, and we want to take that and build it into the software user experience. So the anthropologists on one side are creating a great user experience. Programmers are on the other side creating elegant software that brings those user experiences to life.
That is very cool. So you're touching on two different parts here of this sort of Menlo Way, or actually multiple, the open office spaces, in-person environments. You're talking about high-tech anthropologists, working my way backwards here, and then also the pairing concept.
Yes.
So on the, I would imagine on the pairing concept, let's dive in there because you do talk about it in your book a little bit, Joy Inc. You talk about creating the open workspaces, pair programming, welcoming infants and pets into the office. Yes. Is that also true?
Yes.
Okay. So I would imagine that there's a sort of a surprising benefit to the peer programming, the pair programming that you're offering, because as a CEO, we both realize that there's only so much knowledge that a CEO can realistically have about what's going on in the company, no matter how big or small it is, right? Yes. Like you can't know everything that's going on. You have to invest in and hire amazing people and trust that they're going to be empowered to do the work, but also in your case, right, be joyful in the work that they're doing. I would imagine that that surprising benefit would be that you're actually building a somewhat what do I want to say? A somewhat like legacy kind of foundation for the company, because you're not losing that institutional knowledge is basically what I'm trying to say, right? They're not losing that silo if someone leaves, right? Yep. So has that been a surprising benefit that you've seen? Is it's a little bit more resistant when people are out or someone leaves for one reason or another, or what's been most surprising for you?
No, I will say that if I look back to my old days, what I call my trough of disillusionment days, the teams that I was either a part of where I was writing the code, or the teams I was leading when I was managing the people who were writing code, they were always organized around these silos, what we call towers of knowledge. There's one person on the team that knows the secret sauce algorithms and nobody else knows what they know. And unfortunately for that person, while that might feel like job security for a while, it begins to feel like a prison they can't escape from. And so you end up not being able to take vacations whenever you want. And if you do take a vacation, you are taking your laptop with you and your cell phone to make sure you are always available, always on call, even when you're on the beach with your kids. And I didn't want that for them, but I had no other choice. If they were part of a critical system that we were delivering to clients, they had to be available basically 24/7. And the way they did that was to make sure they always had their code nearby, just in case we needed some help in that piece that only they understood. We don't have that at Menlo. Because we pair and switch the pairs every 5 days, that knowledge is shared amongst everyone on the team. So when someone takes a vacation with their children, we literally, through peer pressure alone, no electronics, we cut them off from their email. We tell them, nope, you don't check email while you're on vacation. And one time we did catch one of our team members doing that. And we chastised them when we came back and used them as an example for a few months after that. And she said, I will never do that again. And it was just us being playful, but also communicating, very importantly, a purpose that we feel when you go on that vacation, it is literally there for you to rejuvenate, to spend time with your family. Now, drove her husband crazy that she would be on the beach playing with the kids and he was on his laptop because he didn't work for Menlo. And he's like, don't you have work to do? And she's like, nope, I work at Menlo. When I go on vacation, I can actually enjoy my vacation. And that's very important to us because that is an element of, there is a benefit to paid time off, not just for the employee, but for the employer as well, that chance to refresh and rejuvenate, and not feel like you're trapped in a tower of knowledge. So it's absolutely true, because of the way we work, that we have eliminated that dependence on the towers of knowledge and the silos.
Yeah, and it's so great because most companies aren't set up that way, and it really makes a huge difference in the quality of work that you're able to produce when you can unplug, or when the knowledge is shared more broadly and you feel like a team member has your back, right? Like they can pick it up and run the baton. I think it's just such a big difference, and hopefully there's some employers or companies out there, even startups listening, that can start to build this into their culture even on day one. Which brings me to another question I had, unless you wanted to jump in, but where I was going to take that was for startups, even, mid-sized, larger companies that might hear this episode in the future. Like, what advice would you give them about cultivating that culture of joy within the workplace? Like, some companies, it's really hard for them to pivot once they are a certain way. So maybe you could speak to both the startup and then maybe the company that's really needs to get back to that center of joy.
I know there is a very popular tool in the startup world created by Steve Blank called the business model canvas that a lot of people use. It's kind of a single sheet of paper about what value are we delivering to our customers, how will we monetize it, and that sort of thing. But it's amazing to me how few books on the startup ecosystem ever encourage the founders from day one to start thinking about the culture of the company they're creating. And typically what you'll hear from founders is, you know what? I know culture is important, but right now we're just too busy to get to that. We have to get our MVP out. We have to get to a certain place. We have to get our first customer. And I get all that. I've been through that. But every company has a culture. It can be intentional, like ours is, but most companies have what I call the default culture. How do we behave? What attitudes do we walk into the door with? What behaviors do we tolerate? And if there's no intention behind those things, you end up getting what you get. And the default cultures can work. Sometimes they work really well. But when they stop working, nobody knows why it stopped. It might have been a particular person who was driving that culture, had left the organization, and nobody realized the dependence we had on that person for defining our culture. And then now, if we don't know what was creating our culture in the first place and it goes off track, we don't know how to get it back on the tracks at that point. If you're intentional about it, if you can speak to it, if you can define what is our attitude towards each other, how will we behave towards our peers and towards the world, if we can start getting that alignment early on, a lot of things get a lot simpler when the pressure mounts.
Right. It's interesting because, to draw an analogy here with sports, there was a recent video or article that came out from Colin Cowherd. I don't know if you're familiar.
I know the name, but don't know the story.
So he runs kind of a sports talk show, but it made me think about what you're talking about. And he was saying how Jim Harbaugh, to bring it back to Michigan here, in every organization that he's been a part of, he's been the tone setter, right? So he is the coach who's pretty, from what I hear, aggressive, right, in terms of his leadership style. He has a no BS policy. He holds a very high standard with his teams. And when he was at Stanford, when he was at U of M, when he was at the 49ers, and now the Chargers, what you find is that in the first year or two, you immediately start seeing impact. The team's growth, the numbers of wins goes up and these totals go up. And then suddenly when he leaves, the team seemed to be like the worst that they've ever been, right? Mm-hmm. And so it really, is interesting because you can set data and metrics and KPIs and all these things, and those are important, but really the foundation of a strong culture and a tone setter in your organization can really make a bigger difference almost on your ability to achieve those results that you're looking for. So I just wanted to bring that up because I just saw it in, Jim Harbaugh. We're here in Ann Arbor, so shout out to him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as often they say, character is, what do you do when the world isn't watching? I think culture is also, how does the culture behave when the boss isn't in the office, right? And I think that's an important indicator of, have you Have you planted the seeds appropriately so that when you step away, even if it's walking down the street to go to a podcast, that I'm not worried about how Menlo's behaving when I'm not in the room. And that's because we are very intentional with our culture. And we literally begin teaching at the moment of first contact with people who are coming to visit with us.
So what are those first experiments that you can run either with a client or with an organization that you're sort of teaching the Menlo Way?
Yeah, and I would say that, again, we have a very specific way of working, and I would never try and tell the world that we have found the one true way of working and everyone should just copy us. You can come learn from us, and I would encourage anybody to do that. Any startup founders here in the Southeast Michigan region can simply, come in for a public tour. We do 1 or 2 public tours a month. If they're far away, we do virtual public tours. They're free, so they can come in and look at our culture. And obviously, I've written a couple of books, so they can read those. And again, my purpose in pointing people to either a tour or a book isn't to say, come look at us and copy us, but rather come in, look at us, and be inspired by us. To ask questions, to probe in, to decide whether there's elements of Menlo you might want to bring home with you. But the other broad message I offer people is, if you intend to create a culture, if you start to outline what that is, those cultural intentions must be present in every step of the traditional HR processes as well. So, for example, how do you recruit? How do you interview? How do you onboard? How do you promote and give feedback? All of those things should be aligned with your cultural intention. And if they're not, you're going to have sort of the world's outside perception of you and then the inside reality of the people that work there. And if those two aren't in alignment, you only have consternation and stress and quite frankly, people saying, yeah, it's not like that, inside the company. So
Yeah, I think that also speaks to something I'm passionate about, having studied psychology and applied psychology into the different things I do in business and in my career, which is the sort of the frequency of enlightenment, or what I like to say is like authenticity, as sort of being the highest sort of energy that you can experience when you're feeling in your purpose, you're feeling like you are yourself, and not having to compromise who you are, your values, whether it be in the work environment or in your personal life. When you are in that authenticity, it just makes you joyful, really. You experience that.
And
joy,
I will say life gets a whole lot simpler at that point too.
Right.
Because you're not lying to yourself and you're not lying to others.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So let's come back to the other question around elegance and actually shipping software. So do you have a couple of examples? Maybe you want to share a couple from Menlo. Maybe you have an idea of some more broader softwares that really you believe kind of are elegant and delight the users that use them.
Yeah, let's not to call out any in question out there in the world, but there was a time in our industry where there was this idea that, well, just ship it, get it out there, we'll fix it later, right? And probably the most obvious example for those of us who grew up with the Microsoft world of Windows and the early versions of it, we often experienced what was called the blue screen of death. And it would come at random times. We'd be in the middle of a Word document, and all of a sudden our screen was completely blue with a core dump, and we probably lost all of our work. And it was very frustrating. But the real frustration for me isn't that Microsoft was doing that to us, but it was that it was creating a spirit in the tech world that says that's okay. It's okay for software to crash because look how successful Microsoft is. If they can get away with it, why shouldn't we? And I always tell people, well, you're not Microsoft. They can get away with a lot that the rest of us can't. But that is, elegance probably boils down to a simple concept that quality guru W. Edwards Deming offered once upon a time that said, all anyone asks for is a chance to work with pride. And I wasn't given that early on in my career. I wasn't giving that to the people I led. And now we've created a system of work that allows people to work with pride. So what are some of those elements? Number one, by pairing two people together, you're probably going to get a better result every time, because your thinking is incomplete, my thinking is incomplete, but we can sort of heal that incompleteness by working together and coming up with a better answer than either one of us would by ourselves. Because we pair and we swap the pairs, it means we don't have to work overtime in order to get the work done. We can actually expand the team. And the idea of expanding the team means that we can have people who are fresh and not tired. So our fundamental belief is tired people make bad software. We don't want to make bad software. So we don't have a culture of overtime. Most of the industry does. There are legends of programmers, working 60, 70, 80-hour work weeks, week in and week out for months at a time. Well, I will tell you, tired people are putting more bugs in than they're taking out. And so then you're living with a decade after the release of the software of just fixing all the stuff you put in when you were tired. And that's demoralizing. And so the fact that we're not creating that culture of overtime means we have a chance to do the best possible work we can. And then the disciplines we have that are reinforced by the team. For example, this is a fairly simple construct. It's amazing to me how few companies use it and how it's not even being systematically taught at the university computer science level, is to use what's called test-driven design, which is you write the test before you write the code. Then you write the code, you get the test to pass, then you automate those tests and you rerun them. Every time you're making any changes anywhere in the code, you run all the tests you've created. This automated unit testing framework, supplanted by the test-driven design philosophy, means that by and large, the code's always working. There's never a point where we're massing up mounds of technical debt that we have to come back and fix later. My old boss used to tell me, just ship it, we'll fix it later. Well, later never came, ever. And then we just get the legions of calls coming in with problems and bugs. And then you realize, I never got a chance to work with pride. I delivered crappy work to the world. Now I'm going to suffer 10 years of fixing bugs that I could have not put in if I'd taken a better approach. So there's a number of disciplines that our programmers use to create that elegant code the first time so that it isn't working. It doesn't have to be fixed time and time again. Now, the net result of that, broadly speaking, at Menlo, is a remarkable accomplishment that I would have never believed I could say to you today, based on what my thought was when we started Menlo in 2001. If someone had pressed me at the early days of Menlo and said, what would you like to get to? If you dreamed, if you could wave a magic wand, what would the goal of Menlo be? And I'd say, if we could get down to just 1 or 2 software emergencies a week, I would be in heaven. And if they pressed me and said, come on, Rich, set your sights higher than that. What about 1 a month or a couple a quarter, or maybe just a few a year? I would have looked at him and said, are you crazy? This is software. There's no way. Well, I'm happy to report, my team hates me when I do this because they keep thinking I'm going to jinx it. We've had 2 software emergencies in 24 years. That is unbelievable to me. I would have never even thought to predict anything along those lines. But that is a testament to a process that regularly produces high quality code. And people will say, but isn't it more expensive? And my answer is, compared to what? If you're spending 10 years fixing something you released, what's the expense of that? Not just the time expense, the obvious, we're dedicating 30% of our team to fix bugs. But what about the demoralization costs of the team? What about the reputational cost in the marketplace for delivering crappy products? What about your sliding down from being number 1 in your market to number 3 or number 4, or disappearing into oblivion because of the quality problems that are there? So to me, you get everything that I've just described for free because you did it right the first time. And that leads to pride. It leads to an energy of saying, I know we're doing good work on behalf of our clients. It leads to people loving the software we've created, not only because it's beautiful from a user experience standpoint because of our high-tech anthropologists, but imagine you use software that doesn't crash and burn every day.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think that's so amazing. It kind of speaks to a couple of different sort of metaphors out there, measure twice, cut once kind of thing, or, just rework. Even in the business school at Michigan, you learned, the cost of rework, right?
Yep.
And it's so expensive
to
just have to fix it and not just do it right the first time.
And I think even when business schools talk about those things and try and measure the cost of rework, a lot of times they're just looking at how many hours are we spending doing this.
Right.
I want to look at the actual psyche of the team members themselves and say, how do they feel about the work? Because at a certain point, if the attitude is, that's just what we do here. It's just, of course, there's bugs in it. It's how we work. It's what happens. That becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy after a while.
Yeah, it becomes your standard that you're operating off of is, we're going to have problems. But if you're like, no, we're not going to have problems, you're probably not going to have that many.
That's right.
Right?
Yep.
And that's been proven in your organization.
Yeah.
It's awesome. I want to kind of move more broadly into the Ann Arbor tech ecosystem and the things that we're seeing. There's our on-air sign. We'll have to fix that.
How ironic.
There you go, right? Yeah. Yeah. God has mysterious ways. We got to do it right the first time. Anyway, that's fun. So yeah, let's talk a little bit more broadly about Ann Arbor and Michigan's tech ecosystem. There's a lot of interesting things happening. You've been a part of it for a long time and seen the history of it and the evolution. So maybe let's talk about how you've seen it evolve over the years. And then I want to talk to you about the things that we're seeing right now happening. We have, Pitch MI coming, right? Statewide pitch competition, $1 million at stake, right? So we have a lot of really cool things happening. And I've had a couple guests on the show like Pete Martin, who are just complete champions of this ecosystem. But you have probably some of the best knowledge out there of how it's evolved. So talk us through some of the history and the ways that you've seen it evolve into how it is today.
Yeah, you'll probably get a sense. I'm a very proud Michigander. Let's look at Michigan in general as an ecosystem and realize that the amount of amazing innovation that has come out of this state over a couple of centuries is pretty incredible. And I think our biggest challenge in being in Michigan is we're pretty humble people. We don't necessarily like to tout our own successes perhaps as we should. So I think that humility often leads us to thinking like, oh, we're not as powerful as we think we are. But in fact, I mean, if we just look through all of the innovation that has come through Michigan, really in many ways encapsulated beautifully by the Henry Ford Museum in Greenfield Village in Dearborn, and seeing all the things that obviously have come from around the world that are highlighted there, but many of them from here in Michigan. So we need to just understand the foundation on which we're building the ecosystems that we're all enjoying now. But when I came to Ann Arbor in 1978 to go to school, I quickly fell in love with this town. And it is a great town to get an education in because of the educational institutions here, and not just Michigan, between Eastern and Washington Community College and the others around here. And then I found it was a great place to find work in our industry. This is a fairly famous town for technology companies. I'm not even sure people realize that in some ways, while we have some great success stories of late, Duo Security, Ohistosonics, and the unicorns we've witnessed here recently, much of the foundation of the ecosystem was born in the 60s and 70s from units like the Environmental Research Institute of Michigan, some of the great entrepreneurial success stories of ADP, ComShare, MDSI, Sycor. There was amazing stuff going on here back in the 70s and early 80s. And we can't forget that foundation that was being built back then. And but the really great thing that's happened, in my view, since I've been in town here, is the integration now that wasn't always there between the university, the local governmental systems, and the tech ecosystem. It used to be all three of those were completely siloed from one another. Yeah, we had a phrase here in town and gown. And the way it was used was the town was the town, and the university, the gown was the gown, and then ne'er the twain shall meet. Now it's almost impossible to tell where one ends and the other begins. If you look at what's happened with Ann Arbor Spark, which used to be the IT zone, or you look at what's happening inside of Innovation Partnerships, which used to be Tech Transfer, the level of collaboration across this ecosystem is abundant and powerful. Everybody's trying to help one another, which is everything we needed to really light the fire that we're seeing today. And because the growth of this ecosystem is now keeping many of the founders here in town that have had good exits, we now have the experience necessary to foster the next level of growth. And we have a lot of founders in town here, like Doug Song, who are willing to give back, who are willing to share what they've learned with one another, with the rest of the ecosystem, so that you can start to build on the shoulders of the giants that have made this town. And it makes it's been a fun journey to watch this evolution from the 70s to today, and just see how concerted and intentional an effort this town put forth to bring all these pieces together. And I think in many ways we are a model that the world looks to now and say, how did you do this? Because if we think about the accomplishments of Ann Arbor, Michigan, and its surrounding area, we're a pretty small town, and we punch way above our weight for what we've been able to accomplish here. And it's because we've learned how to work together.
That's very true. That last point for sure, around punching above our weight as a city. And it's funny, there's, it's a medium-sized town, right?
Yeah.
But the university definitely drives a ton of the innovation that you're seeing and growth. And something I'd like to see is even more students choosing to stay to build their startups here. Because I think in some of the clubs, I personally am a co-host of A2 New Tech. We run it on the third Tuesday of every month. Currently, we're doing it out of Bamboo, which we're in right now, where the studio is. And the whole goal of that, at least maybe not the founding goal, but the current goal of that meetup, is to basically introduce these student founders to the rest of the ecosystem. That's the way that I'm thinking about it, so that they feel and know that there is stuff happening, because you wouldn't necessarily know all of those things unless you really made an effort as a student to branch off of the campus, right?
Yes.
And so I think we as an ecosystem who are not a part of the university anymore, or even in the first place, ought to extend that hand into the organizations, the student groups. For example, V1 on campus, like, they have awesome builders there. I think they just generated 2 Y Combinator companies, which is great, right? Proud of them for doing that and making that achievement. But why do they have to, or think that they have to move to San Francisco or New York or Boston or somewhere else to build their company, right? So I think it's a balance. You do see people choosing to stay, and there's a lot of innovation, but we could even be doing a better job, I think, of helping those students realize that there's a home here for them to build, and that they can be successful here.
Yeah, and we've clearly done something great in this town, in this region. The collaboration with things that are happening in Detroit is powerful as well, but we're not done. We haven't reached the destination. We haven't hit the promised land. I mean, this is an active, should be ongoing effort, and it is. The work that you're doing, the fact that you're doing these kind of podcasts, the fact that you and I are bumping into each other at Sweetwater's and spending time together, getting to know one another. These are all the important things that need to happen to create a rich ecosystem. I remember when I was a student here, I'm not sure I ever crossed Division Street. I never got to know Ann Arbor. Maybe once in a while a fancy restaurant meal on 4th or Main Street or something like that, but that was it. And now the free flow of people across the boundaries, even within our own community and between Detroit and Ann Arbor, across the southeast Michigan region, means that we're able to connect all the pieces and parts of the ecosystem together. Because, this is what I love about this town is that 10,000 new people arrive every September. 10,000 other people might go, but we have got this constant refresh of people, and that can lead to talent. And yes, some of it sticks, like I did. I fell in love with this town and decided I wanted to raise my family here and ultimately wanted to start a business here. And it's a great place to do that.
I agree with that. Yeah. And it's so peaceful too, I think, as a city. It's not a huge city like New York or Chicago or something, but it feels like a family town.
Yep.
And then you have business leaders like you who really drive the innovation ecosystem forward and create that's seamless pathway to interact with the ecosystem. And I really appreciate that about you, Rich, which is the fact that you open your time up to meet with folks at Sweetwater. It's funny because I read Brad Feld's book, co-founder of Techstars, and I interviewed him on this show a couple episodes back. And he talks about how in his book, he had something where every Thursday, I think it was one day of the week, he would have a random day where anybody who wanted to could book 15 minutes on his calendar. And he would use that as an opportunity to just kind of learn what's happening. What are people thinking or talking about? And he would just sit there and ask questions and maybe respond or maybe introduce someone or, kind of pouring what he says, give first into create that flywheel, right? Effect of serendipity or introductions or things happening, right? So I think if we continue as an ecosystem, leaders like you and me and others, kind of embrace that philosophy more too of giving first, giving our time, creating that opportunity zone for things to happen. Great things can happen.
And I think we've also got to share the components that got us to where we are. And I will tell you, for me personally, and I just did a blog post or a LinkedIn post on this recently. Somebody asked me for some key advice. I said, get out of the house. Get out into a coffee shop. If you're checking email or you're on LinkedIn or you're, trying to create some ideas for your business, go do it in a coffee shop. Don't do it at home because you're likely to run into either one of us or anybody else in this town, and you'll start to build those really important relationships, those serendipitous moments of meeting somebody who you didn't even know was in the town, who you didn't know what they knew. You didn't know how willing they were to help you, and you aren't going to discover that when you're in your own community that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I want to do a quick touch on this point, being mindful here around AI, because you're in software. Some people like, what's his name? Greg Eisenberg, say that SaaS is dead. And
okay, all right.
And we're moving into a new era here in software. It was a great run, but there's a new gold rush coming. So what's your take on that? What do you see as coming down the pipe, changing with AI, how you're restructuring, or if at all, how people are working in the environment? And
I'll offer two vastly different perspectives. One is all the old stuff actually never dies. 50% of code still runs on mainframe computers. And it's COBOL. So that body of work is still there, and it's still important. It's still running a lot of the world. That said, there are significant moments that I can look back over the course of my sort of 50-ish years in this industry, and sometimes you know it in the moment, and sometimes it takes you a little while when you're in those important moments. So for me, that first touch on computers when I was a kid, the release of the IBM personal computer in 1982 and the Macintosh that followed after that, the first time I touched the Mosaic browser and got to peek into the internet and what its implications are and the growth of the World Wide Web, and the consternation that happened between 1999 and 2001 when everything looked like it was going web, and then it all retreated, and then it just kept moving forward again. I think some people might have declared the internet died in 2001. Nope, it just was rebirthing itself. and obviously the release of mobile devices, our phones and tablets and that sort of thing, and then cloud computing. And, we are absolutely in one of those moments right now. There's just zero question about this. This is an important moment. AI is going to change so much societally, just like all those other revolutions did. We've got to pay attention to it. And quite frankly, I'm paying a lot of attention to the experts in this world. And what seemingly is common among almost all of them is we have no idea where this is actually going and how fast it's going to get there. But it is going, and it is going to get there fast, and we all better be paying attention to it.
Do you have any predictions for what the world looks like, even in just, let's say, 5 years?
I think that, we are still today, and we will be for a while, still in that process of assimilating this into our daily lives. I find it interesting, even when I talk to people who people consider experts, they will say one thing publicly, and then when you talk to them privately, you find out they have their own doubts about how fast it's going, how good it is, whether it's as complete as people think it is. And you see a lot of technology adoption curves that start to sort of hit that S point where they start to trail off. A good example of this is autonomous vehicles. It's not that we aren't getting great benefit from autonomous vehicle efforts, and that there aren't, under certain conditions, those autonomous vehicles work really well, but we haven't hit the equivalent of, autonomy working everywhere all the time for everybody, and our cars don't have steering wheels, brakes, or gas pedals anymore. But we are deriving tremendous societal benefit from greater safety of vehicles and so on. I know I'm a better husband because of my adaptive cruise control in my car. So my wife doesn't have to yell at me every time I'm getting close to the car in front of me. My car just slows down because it can sense it. Those are all benefits we're getting out of the autonomous vehicle revolution, and we're going to see the same thing in AI. And so all of us should be using it some level every day. In some ways, I find that I don't. I'm not inclined to do Google searches like I used to. I'm more inclined to do product searches on ChatGPT, and I find the richness of the responses is far more informative than a traditional Google search. Google search now feels like legacy to me. Just like we used to refer to mainframes as legacy. Now it feels so clunky, and stuff I used to think was amazing. Now it's like, really? That's the best you can do? And so I think that, I think it's ultimately going to make us more human, not less. Yeah. I think the frontier we're on is the one where we're deciding what makes us the most human, the creativity, the imagination, the invention, the innovation. That's still the realm of humanity. But these tools are going to get us there faster. And so I think we are in a moment here, and we've got a lot of things to figure out, power-wise, electricity-wise, and, consumption of resources, and how humans will use it for good versus evil and all that sort of thing. It cannot be ignored.
All right. Well, with that, this has been a very joyful experience, a great episode. Is there anything else that you want to share with the audience in terms of either ways to get in touch or find out more or anything like that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I am very active on LinkedIn, so if people want to just connect with me, tell me you watched or you listened to this show and appreciated what you heard, and I'm more likely if you send a little blurb along with your invite to invite you into my network, and if you see me around town, stop by and say hi.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. That is Richard Sheridan, and we will see you on the next episode.
Thanks, Ryan.